And I think we're ready to go. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm excited about today. We have a couple of we have exciting guests coming on. And Adam Wachtel, I've been I'm sure many of us have been aware or familiar with him for quite a while. He's not a new name. The family name is not a new name in horse racing. Certainly have had such nice horses. Couple of champions last year, Channel Maker, he was a turf champion in 2020. V-Quist won the Breeders' Cup. She was a champion, a juvenile champion filly. Again, there's a whole slew of stakes winners prior to that. But Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And let's just start. 2020 was just a remarkable season for you.
It was a great year. Unfortunately, I never made it to one single race. I haven't been to a race in 14 months, but it really was for the stable. It was a special year, and so I enjoyed it, watching it on my computer and on TVG, and was very proud of the horses and the work that my trainers did.
Now, let's start with Channel Maker, because he's the type of horse that obviously he had a good year, won grade ones, like he really had a really solid year for him. But did you think halfway through the season, or maybe even into the fall, did you think that he was going to end up with a title, with a championship?
Well, I mean, I knew that he was still a great horse, even though the first part of the year things didn't go well. He typically hasn't had a good start to the year. He's done most of his good work over the summer and during the fall, sometimes late spring. But we knew he was still doing well. I mean, I trust Bill Mott when he tells me the horse is thriving and he's as good as he ever was. So we just needed to get a little bit lucky and get him back on track and into the winner's circle. And things, started to go our way. And he really ended with a bang. I'd say the last 3 races, the 2 grade 1 wins. And then his effort in the Breeders' Cup, really, that made me super proud. That was really quite something. It took 2 really special European fillies to run him down, and he was clearly the best of the North American horses. And not to be overlooked, the fact that those fillies both were had a big weight advantage, from Channel Maker. I guess it was probably 5 pounds each. I don't have the chart in front of me, but and that, by the way, I don't know if you saw, he just ran 2 days ago in Saudi Arabia, and another filly, he was second in the big stake there, and another filly that got 5 pounds ran him down. So he's just a neat horse. He's been great since he's a 2-year-old, and we've tried to do the right thing by him by spreading out his races, which is a big part of my philosophy and on what you do with horses. You treat them right, and you run them at the right times, and take care of them, and they'll reward you, and he has.
He certainly has. And you're right, in Dubai, it's funny because, big thing with, and this is a discussion, a very hot button discussion with many of the turf riders. We talk about a lot of times, or there have been times in the past when European horses come over, they're tremendous in Europe, they come to the United States, they win the Breeders' Cup Turf or the Mile, and they earn the championship. And I'm like really hardcore the other way. I feel like you should, I believe that the way the Canadian system is with the sovereign awards, that you have to run 3 times in Canada. And I wish it was like that in the United States, to be honest, but I'm glad it was an American horse who won the championship. He deserved it. I
thank you. I agree. And I agree with you. I don't think it's right to have a horse come to the United States, run once, and then take home an Eclipse Award. So whether it was Channel Maker or another horse, I'm glad it was a North American based horse. And I do believe he really earned it. I would have been disappointed for him and my partners and all the connections if he hadn't gotten it. And I felt the same way about V-Quist. I felt she really earned her Eclipse Award, and I was proud of that.
Well, speaking of V-Quist, what did you see was the progression for her in 2020? What did you start by thinking, like coming into 2020, what were you thinking, and how did the season go for you?
Well, we identified her off of her maiden race, where she actually was second in a maiden race at Parks over the summer. And the way that I've always bought horses, I'm 58 now, and I've bought my first horse when I was 18, with my dad. So I've been doing this a long time, and always have, not always, but the vast majority of, oops, I think I disappeared on you. Okay.
No, I think I can see you and hear you.
Okay,
I think
there you
you're
go.
still
Okay,
okay. Yeah.
sorry. So the vast majority of horses that I've purchased over the years have been off of sheet figures. So how fast a horse runs. And, some people look at buyer numbers, I look at Ragusan numbers. And her first number made her the second fastest 2-year-old filly in North America, behind a horse that she wound up tangling with a couple of times after that, day out of the office. So I was very encouraged by that first effort and spoke to my main partner, Gary Barber, about we should pursue this horse. Led to a negotiation, led to the idea of leaving her with her trainer, Butch Reed, who, I did my homework on him. I didn't know Butch, but he came highly recommended. And so we created a little partnership there. And I told Butch, when we were able to finalize the deal, that you're going to think I'm crazy, but I wouldn't run her in a maiden race. I think she's, special and fast, and let's point her to Saratoga to a stake race. And we did. And she of course, she destroyed the field that day and kind of set her on her path towards the Breeders' Cup. And, things obviously worked out nicely for us.
And now, we get an update on her. What is she doing right now? What are we planning with her? And where do we think she's going to go from here?
So, after the Breeders' Cup, we knew win or lose in that race, we would give her a little time afterwards and, point towards the Kentucky Oaks. And when she ran so well in the Breeders' Cup, that seemed like a logical thing to do. So then we kind of wanted to work backwards from the Oaks and decided that maybe we would give her 2 races. Hopefully she'd be healthy enough and fit and everything would go well. And so we kind of picked the Devona Dale, which is coming up this weekend at Gulfstream. Butch decided to locate down in Florida for the winter. And I think she had a lot to do with his decision to do that because he's basically a Philadelphia-based trainer. So we sent her down to Ocala to get a little rest and started her back up there. And then she went to South Florida to Butch, and she's been training ever since. And things have gone well. And so we'll get her started, this Saturday. It's a 1-turn mile. We're cutting her back in distance. This is not our goal. I mean, we're trying to win the race. Don't get me wrong, but this isn't our objective. So we hope to run well this weekend. Hopefully she'll win. I'm sure there'll be some good fillies in the race. And then from there, probably go back to Keeneland where she won the Breeders' Cup, prep there, and then hopefully go from there to the Kentucky Oaks if things go well and she stays sound. So that's kind of the plan.
Okay. Now, and how many trainers do you have currently horses with? Because you have most of your horses, I understand, in partnerships. Is that correct? Or am I?
Yes and no. I mean, from the beginning, I had horses on my own or with my dad, and then kind of got my dad involved with partnering with just, 1 or 2 people along the way. I have a lot of horses with Gary Barber, and like a case like Vequist, where Gary and I would have bought the whole horse, but the breeder and our partner, Tom McGrath, decided he'd like to stay involved. And so we wound up as, 3 people owning the horse. So I'm never opposed to that as long as it's somebody that I want to be associated with. And, he seemed like a good guy and he had a good reputation. I try to stay away from controversial people and controversial trainers whenever I can. And so I do wind up with Gary and a lot of horses, but not always. I have a couple of other partners. So in a perfect world for me, I would buy somewhere between 25 and 50% of one of these horses that are already running or made horses. And a lot of them go to Bill Mott. A lot of times we give trainers a chance, like we did with Butch Reed, or I did with Jerry O'Dwyer. We had a horse last year called Shotsky that won the Remsen. He was a nice colt. We left him with Jerry. Did the same with Tim Keefe, another mid-Atlantic trainer, nice guy. I have in California, most of my horses go to Peter Miller, who does a real good job for us out there. My homebreds in New York, which is a very important part of my stable, something that was important to my dad, so I've kind of continued on with the tradition of it. Most of those go to Chris Engelhardt, who does a great job. And then I've had horses with Mark Cassey, with Gary. So there's some other trainers that I have horses with, but again, a lot of them wind up with Bill Mott and Peter Miller.
Okay. Now you mentioned your dad a few times now. If you could just go back and just give us a little bit of background, how you got involved and how important your father was as a figure in terms of getting you into racing.
Yeah, he introduced me to the sport when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. he actually took me to Monticello. We went to the Trotters. I have a winner's circle picture from that day. I'm not sharing that. But and that from there, he always said to me that if he ever had the money, he'd buy a racehorse. And then I guess it was the early 1970s. So I was probably 10, 11 years old. He got his first racehorse, and with a trainer that named Howie Tesher, who doesn't train anymore. And he was our first trainer for a long time. And so I would go to the races with my dad and go back to the barn, and immediately fell in love with the sport. So I knew as a young guy that someday this is what I wanted to do. I mean, I went to college, I went to business school, I went to law school, but that was always, first and foremost on my mind was to pursue a career with this. And I've kind of built my life around it professionally. And my dad was there every step of the way. He passed away some years ago, and there was a time probably 15, 20 years ago where I took over the stable, but he would still come with me. And Saratoga in particular was always a very special place for my family. And we would go up there in the summers, and I don't live that far away, a couple hours. So we would drive back and forth sometimes, and a lot of great memories there. But he had a great influence on my life in general, but in particular, he introduced me to this sport, and I learned an awful lot with him. We learned together, actually. And I know he'd be awful excited and proud if he could have been a part of some of the great horses I've had in the last 10, 15 years.
Right. Now, did you see from that time when your dad had, he started up the stable, bought a few horses, and you were starting to get involved, and from when you took over, you said about 15, 20 years ago, was there a departure in terms of what he had been doing, or maybe had you just kind of changed, like tweaked things a little bit since then, or have you pretty much followed a standard, like a similar pattern as your dad?
I did things a little bit differently. One thing was I really wanted to treat it more as a business than strictly as a hobby. And my dad, I didn't want to get attached to the horses. I wanted to be willing to sell horses at the right time, which I think is a very important part of the sport. If you're going to survive, you need to, I think you need to be willing to sell at times. And my dad and his buddies really didn't do much of that. And so along the way, I've sold either all or part of some of the best horses I've ever owned, including, you mentioned Channel Maker, including him. I guess it was about 2 years ago, Gary Barber and I sold half of Channel Maker to Randy Hill and Dean Reeves, and it's worked out really nicely for all of us. And so that's a little bit of a difference. I also cut back a little bit on the breeding end from what my dad was doing. He had 15 or 20 mares, and when I took over, I saw the bills. I'm like, I don't think I want this many mares. So I cut that back to, over the years, somewhere between 7 and 10 mares typically. So I've done things a little bit differently, and I've kind of focused, I think, also on what I felt were better quality horses. I'm always trying to buy into horses I hope can become stake horses. And in doing so, that's why, I'll partner with one or two guys, rather than buying 100% of a horse. I'd rather buy 25% or 50% of an even better horse. And so that's a little bit different than what my dad used to do.
Okay. And now, so when you were saying, so you focused less on the breeding aspect of it, more on the racing, again, it looks like you go more into partnerships. You mentioned a couple of percentages. Is there like a minimum percentage that you would go into on a horse, or do you have a standard, like, is there, 25% is the minimum, or do you not? Do you just get in whatever you want to get in on?
Pretty much, I won't buy unless I personally can have a 25% stake in a horse. Not that I think there's anything wrong with taking less than that. I did that once that I can think of. Even though I wasn't listed, I owned a little bit less than that of Exaggerator, who won the Preakness. And you won't see my name in the charts. I'm not in it for the publicity. I didn't really care about that. But I did make a deal to buy a minority interest along with a couple of partners, and again, left my name out of it. But that was an exception because I thought he was something special, and I thought he had a chance to win a Derby. He was second in the Derby. But typically, I would say that I don't want to take less than 25%, just my own personal view. And I do think it's, especially for, people getting started in the sport, to take a small percentage of a horse. I'd rather see, if a newcomer comes to me and asks my opinion, I'd say, I'd rather see you buy part of several horses than all of one horse, because they are fragile and it can be difficult. And so I think spreading your risk, just like probably anything in life, it makes a lot of sense.
What are some of the you mentioned just a few minutes ago, you were talking about when you get in, you partner with other people on a horse, whether it's the trainer or the owners, other owners, that you want to make sure that they're people you feel comfortable investing with. And now we just talked about percentage. Is there anything else that goes into that decision that you would advise? Now we've got a bunch of people on here listening. Maybe they want to get into a partnership. Is there any other like pieces of advice that you'd give them in regards to things to keep in mind when you're getting into a partnership?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I just want to be involved with, reputable people. And so I think if you're getting started and you don't know much yet, try to align yourself with someone personally, if you can, that understands the sport and has some experience, and they can help guide you initially. I mean, we all have to get started somewhere and learn, right? So if you can stick with, reputable trainers. I personally, there are trainers in our sport that are pretty controversial, and you're not going to see my name in ownership with those particular trainers. I just don't want to be involved. It's not worth it to me. My, integrity means a lot. I've written some articles in the last year in particular for Blood Horse, and I talk about that a lot. The sport's gotten a black eye, and well, it's always been that way. There's always guys looking to cut corners and use their veterinarians in ways they shouldn't. And unfortunately, that kind of blew up last spring with some of the guys that got indicted. So my personal philosophy is I want to be with, again, Bill Mott's a great example, Hall of Famer. You're not going to read about him with drug positives all the time. And he's just a great person and a great horseman. That's who I want to be involved with. The guys that are controversial, I'm staying away. So my suggestion is find reputable people to be involved with, people that you trust. I mean, there are, partnerships, somebody's got to run it and somebody's got to make decisions. And when there's dollars and cents involved, you got to be a little bit concerned sometimes. So try to be around good people that aren't trying to make an arm and a leg. I think what your racing club is doing is wonderful. You're not looking to bring people in the sport, take their money, make money off of them. It was explained to me today, because I didn't know that much about it, that whatever leftover proceeds you have go to rescue organizations. I think that's great. And it gives your members an opportunity to get an introduction into this great sport.
Now, let's go back to your business model for a second. You have a filly like Vequist, and obviously you own her in partnership with other people. But is it typically your business model that if you have a nice filly that you might keep her for breeding? You did say you have a very limited number, you're focusing on quality. Or is if it's a filly of that caliber, that's a grade 1 filly, she's a champion, is she one of those horses that at the end of the year or at the end of her career, you might consider selling her? In terms of, just to keep your stable, in the black.
Yeah, she'll likely get sold at some point. Hopefully she'll have a grade 3-year-old year, and I hope that she'll be able to win more grade 1s. And, as a champion by a hot young sire, she's already got, really great residual value. So whether she'll get sold, this November at a sale or a year later, she's not one I would likely wind up keeping. There's possibility. I mentioned that I've sold part or all of most of the great horses I've ever owned. So could there be a situation where, one of the big players in the sport might approach us and say they want to, they're willing to buy her from us, and we could stay in for a small piece, and then maybe she gets bred and we keep the babies? That's possible. And the more likely scenario is that ultimately we would sell her. But, I can't say for sure, but that would be most likely.
And the mares that you do keep, in terms of the stallions that you select for them to be bred to, are there particular stallions that you're fond of? Is there one stallion or maybe a group of stallions that you tend to are your go-to, or does it just really depend on the mare?
Well, that's interesting. It kind of brings me back to the question you asked about my dad and how he got me involved. And so what he did, and this is late 1970s, I guess, he retired one of his good colts and made a stallion out of him. Ever since then, we've always owned, or I've, myself or prior with my dad, a stallion in New York. So I've always had my own stallion to breed to. Right now it's Al Khali, who was a really super turf horse that Bill Mott trained for me. And I pretty much just breed them to my own mares, and, we get some outside interest, but I don't know how to promote a stallion. If there's anybody on this call that does, give me a call. But it wasn't really the intent. It wasn't to make a commercial stallion out of him. It was, I loved the horse. He had great pedigree. He was great looking. And So I don't like to pay big stud fees. It allows me to breed to my own stallion. We've done that 4 or 5 times in my life, where I've owned stallions. Now I also, in a different sense, one of the stallions that I own part of is Tourist, who we won a Breeders' Cup with, and he stands at WinStar, and I retained an interest in him. So I bought mares specifically to breed to him that are in Kentucky now. But typically I do not breed my mares to outside stallions unless there's a compelling reason. Like if I kept Vequist, I probably would select the top stallion to breed her to, and we would do, and I've done that on occasion, and it, in the end, usually sold the mares, whether in full at some point.
Now, you had mentioned the New York program in terms of the breeding, the racing program, or the racing in New York. Tell me a little bit about that, your focus, and what you think about the program and how you try to capitalize on it.
I think it's a great program, the New York Breeding Program, the Breeders' Awards that they have, the Stallion Awards. It's always been something that, it's been incorporated into everything that we've done, again, starting with my dad, and I've continued on with that. So I've always tried to find mares that, they're not the fanciest mares that I have. They're not the best ones that are, here in New York for me, but they're usually ones that were sound and that I hope would throw off, sound runners, so that I can stay involved with the New York breeding program. So I do think it's probably the best breeding program in the country. Pennsylvania's got a good program too, and I have a couple of California breds that have worked out nicely as well. These state programs can really provide great incentives, and so I'm a big believer in them, and I've always tried to support the New York program.
If anybody has a question, I see everybody's pretty much on here right now. If anybody has a question, please feel free to open up your mic and ask Adam. Oh, I see Aaron. Hi.
Hi.
Aaron, go ahead.
I missed the first few minutes. I don't know if you talked about it, but Adam, you're famous for buying a lot of proven horses. Can you talk through, and I don't know if you answered this already, but like the process of selecting one of those proven runners to buy, like we talked earlier today about a horse that you might call a trainer about, but your selection process. I met Adam a long time ago. We both had Howie Tesher as our trainer, and Adam actually was the first person to turn me into the sheets, using the Ragozin and the Thoroughgraph sheets. And I learned a lot from Adam, and I know he uses them. And maybe, Adam, if you don't mind talking about the process, how you go about starting your filter of that selection process and how you make an offer and stuff like that, if you could explain that to people for a private sale.
Sure. So Aaron and I go back a long ways, grew up at the track together. So it's, we look a little older, Aaron, but still good to see. From day one, and I know a lot more now after looking at sheets for almost 40 years. The number one criteria in buying a made horse was trying to buy fast horses. Ones that not only were fast but had the kind of sheet that suggested to me they were still improving and were of value. So we kind of call them sometimes buried horses whose sheets suggest that they're maybe more valuable than the public might realize. I mean, Vequist is a great example of that. She just lost a maiden race at Philadelphia Park. What made her so special? Well, she had a fast sheet. So I start with that. Then I look at who the trainers are. There are definitely trainers I won't buy from. So I eliminate horses right there. I then go watch replays. I'm not a horseman. I don't have a great eye, but when it comes to video replays and how horses move, from all these years of doing it, I can kind of pick them out. But when it comes down to confirmation or, I'm okay, but I don't trust myself there. So that's when I involve trainers and veterinarians and sometimes some independent agents. So if I get from how fast a horse is to whether I like them, and then look at their pedigree, and it doesn't have to be that there's a pedigree full of champions. It could be a pedigree there's 7 horses under the dam. None of them are stake winners, but they run from the time they're 2 to they're 10. And that suggests to me that they're sound. These are all factors that are important to me. And then ultimately, can we make a deal? Some owners just fall in love with their horses and don't want to sell. So I usually strike out. So I have to try a lot. And then we get down to a vetting process, and half of them fail that. So it's not so easy to come up with them. But if I get through all those steps and I'm able to make a deal and the vets say, okay, then I know I have a chance. I mean, I've kind of eliminated, some of my partners and friends left to buy yearlings. well, I don't know if they're ever going to run. You know, I'm buying a horse that's already made it through all those steps, made it to the races, is fast enough to catch my attention, and passed all those other tests that I just mentioned. I probably have a decent chance that I'm going to win some races. I can't help injury. That's always the big problem in the sport. But again, I feel pretty confident when I pull the trigger that I'm probably buying a horse that's got some talent.
That was a great question, Aaron, as always. Adam, I have a question for you. In terms of the type of horses that you pursue, you said that you have that system that you're looking for, like that you go through to. Do you have any, will you typically go for younger horses? Are you typically looking for 2-year-olds, or do you vary it, or does it really depend on what you find?
I really don't have a preference. I mean, I've bought 2-year-olds, I've purchased 5-year-olds. You know, some of my favorite ones are ones that I bought that were maidens as a 4-year-old, and I just saw that this is a really fast horse that's been unlucky. So to answer your question, no, there's no specific type. I'm just looking for horses that I believe have the talent, that the direction that they're headed in. Maybe it just takes a change of venue. And what I mean by that is sometimes, like I found a horse, I'll give you one current one, Chewing Gum. I bought him as a maiden, as a 4-year-old maiden in Southern California. That was so fast. He was running stakes quality numbers. He was just at Southern California at that particular point in time, the turf horses were really fast. And so to me, it seemed like if I sent him back east, he'd have a much better chance to succeed. He was better than he appeared. And so I bought him in California with 2 partners. We sent him to Belmont. We ran him first time out. He won in Kentucky Downs for us. And he established himself as I think he's a stakes quality horse. He's running some stakes. And so he was a, horse that probably most people wouldn't have looked at, but based on being in the wrong location, but fast enough, I realized I could move him to a different location and probably have a chance to win some races. And that's what happened.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question for Adam? You guys can unmute yourself and jump in. Everybody's very attentive. Everybody's very attentive and listening. Oh, I think somebody opened up their mic. Hi there.
Hi, Christina. It's Shane.
Hi, Shane.
Shane. I'm on the phone. Hi. So I have a question. I know Adam mentioned the integrity of horse racing a lot as far as the trainer. What's your view on the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act?
I think it's a wonderful thing. One of the articles I wrote was patting on the back those that got behind it. I think that there's been a great need in the sport for a national body to monitor it and make sure that we're all on an even playing field. The fact that there are different medication rules in all the different states never made any sense to me. And the reality is, and Aaron, you know this as well, that over the years, there's always been guys that have cheated. Many of them have gotten caught and run out of the sport. But it would be easier to, I think, to kind of get a hold of what's going on and kind of keep an eye on them if we had one set of rules and one body that could monitor things. And so I think that was a very important step in the right direction, and I'm a big fan of it.
Great question. Thank you, Shane. Shane, do you have another question? Are you still there?
I don't. So
okay.
I'm good. Thanks for the answer.
Thank you. Thanks. What now? How did 2020? Obviously, it impacted people in so many different ways with COVID. And you mentioned that you haven't been to the track in over a year, which is obviously very disappointing, not only for folks who own horses. You had Breeders' Cup, you had a Breeders' Cup winner, you had a champion or 2 champions. But how did it affect your actual stable, your business, or did it affect your business in terms of maybe you did a few things differently because of COVID?
Honestly, it really didn't have a great impact on me. It wound up being a great year. There was some time in the spring where there was no racing. So I guess, yes, for a short period of time, it was a little frustrating not knowing what was going to happen next and where to send our horses, what to do with them. We sent some from the racetrack to the training centers, like to Fair Hill, for example. And so there was some uncertainty. But once, the industry did a fantastic job as a whole of keeping racing going. And so for the most part, yes, purses did suffer a little. There's no doubt. I think we're starting to get back to normal. New York purses in particular, are great. So there was definitely some downside, but my stable had a good year, and it didn't impact any of my decision making. I was still able to go out and find some talent and make some deals and continue on business as usual. But it certainly was, we had horses in Dubai ready to run. We had 4 of them, and they canceled the day before the races. And now we had to figure out, how do we get our horses and the trainers back, the assistant trainers back. So there definitely was some, serious concern that took place during the year. But all in all, I think we all worked through it together as an industry, and I think it wound up fine. And again, for my stable, it worked out to be a great year.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to it, now looking forward, obviously we've got Vequist to look forward to this weekend in the Devona Dale. We have Channel Maker. Is Channel Maker still going to be running this year? Is he going to run into?
Yeah, well, again, he just ran 2 days ago in Saudi
Right.
Arabia, and next up, he's in Dubai already. So he's going to run. There's a big race there for him at the end of next month. So he'll point to that, and our hope is, he loves Saratoga, is to get him back. We'll see how much rest he needs when he returns from Dubai. Maybe get to run him once at Belmont before they head to Saratoga, and pointing back to the Breeders' Cup. Hopefully the old guy is still on top of his game. So really looking forward to that. Obviously, Vequist coming up is we're excited about that as well. So, hoping for another great year.
Yeah, and now besides the big 2, is there anything else? Are there any other horses that are might be under the radar right now, but you're expecting good things from them?
I actually think I mentioned Chewing Gum. I don't know that he's going to be that level, but I think he won't surprise me. He was just getting a little freshening. There was nothing wrong with him. He just, he'd had a long campaign and hadn't had any rest, and so Mr. Mott turned him out. He's in Ocala right now, just starting up again. I think he's kind of an interesting horse, and I hope that he can win a stake race for us. Shotsky is a horse I mentioned, who we sent. He was one of the ones in Dubai who would have been probably the favorite in the UAE Derby. Came back. He had 1 race off the layoff so far. It was terrible at Aqueduct. He just got real tired, and he's supposed to run this week. I mean, he was a great 3-year-old. He was a legitimate Derby kind of horse a year ago, and I'm hoping we'll see some of that from him. We ran a horse this weekend, Needs Supervision, in the Barbara Fritchie. She finished 4th, got beat half a length for 3rd. And I would say that I thought she'd been eased. She was so wide that coming around the turn that she disappeared off the screen. And I'm like, oh no, what happened to her? And then they crossed the finish line, and here she is. I mean, basically the jockey went into the grandstand with her. She's got some talent. I like her. And there's some others too. I mean, we just had a new horse we bought that ran. We bought her last week, and she ran at Golden Gate the other day. And she won for us first time out. Just a 3-year-old filly that ran for the 2nd time. And so, we're always looking. I'm hoping to find another Vequist. They're not so easy to find, or another Channel Maker. But I will. I look every day, do my homework, and that's one thing. You got to be a little bit dedicated, and I am.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question before we let Adam go? I think we're good. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. This has really been, hold on a second. I think Aaron just came on.
No,
Aaron?
I was saying, I wanted to say goodbye when he was getting on.
Okay.
Good to see you, Aaron.
Good to see you, Adam. Be well.
Too.
Yeah, and thank you, Adam. It's been very informative, and just a lot of great horses. And you honestly, every time I turn around, it seems to be that I see your name. Your name is one of the owners on these horses. But thank you so much, and good luck this weekend with Vequist in the Devona Dale.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Adam.
Take care.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears. That was Adam